Before I start talking about this season, I want to give a tiny bit of my backstory and feelings towards the show. I am not one of those insane people that would kill themselves just to get a sauce. I also am not a hater. I was watching the show before its remarkable boost in popularity. I know people say it has a terrible fan base, but hey, as of when this video is released, we got 70 new episodes confirmed. I am not a person that thinks this show is laugh out loud funny most of the time. I do appreciate all of the wit behind the jokes, but witty jokes tend to make me smile more than laugh. There are some jokes that make me laugh, but I like this show for its sci-fi nonsense, so that is my mindset behind watching this. Ready, set, go. The pilot of Rick and Morty has Rick and Morty getting some seeds for Rick's experiments, Jerry being concerned behind Rick's influence on Morty, and Summer and her dead sack of shit crush, I guess. For the most part, it does what a pilot needs to do. It introduces the characters and tells you what their dynamics amongst each other are like. The plots themselves aren't brilliant by any means, but it's rare a pilot is a complicated episode. I'm not going to be nice because of that, I'm just stating what I tend to see in pilots. With it being a pilot, there are a lot of issues here that I have with most pilots. The voices of both Rick and Morty, and I don't care what anyone says, they don't sound like Rick and Morty here. Not current Rick and Morty anyway. They kind of sound like impressions of them.
That's the last straw! I can't believe this! I'm sitting here with both of my legs broken!
Justin Roiland has definitely improved as a voice actor, but if I heard just Morty's voice from this episode, I would think it's a random alien dude called Sugary Anal Flapper. I really don't get that Rick and Morty feel here. It has the improv bits, but with the plot being so simple compared to the future, and characters yet to be developed, it falls a bit flat for me. It also isn't even nearly packed with as much wit as most episodes. A lot of the jokes fell flat for me in this one too. I might get a lot of hate for this, but I dislike the 100 years of Rick and Morty thing. It isn't intelligent and I think it probably should have been scrapped. I also thought certain other jokes fell flat just because of the voice acting, which like I said, luckily improves drastically very quickly. That doesn't mean the episode's bad, because it isn't. There's plenty of redeemable aspects like Rick's line about bureaucrats and the beautiful animation on monsters and backgrounds. This is a mediocre episode of Rick and Morty. When I watched it the first time, I wasn't sure if I was going to continue watching the series, but I always get past the pilot to see if a show's truly good. I've talked to plenty of other people about this, and they've all agreed that the show picks up in episode 2. This, however, is only mediocre. Rick and Morty try to go inside Goldenfold's dreams so that they can convince him to give Morty good grades. Meanwhile, the rest of the family has to deal with Snuffles, a dog that Rick made intelligent. Both plots in this episode are pretty interesting. Seeing an Inception-like thing where they keep going inside of creatures' dreams never gets boring. The Snuffles side isn't as interesting to me, but the show does a great job connecting both plots. While I don't think I find anything in this episode quite laugh out loud funny, there are plenty of great humorous moments.
Allah Akbar! We're gonna take control of this plane! We're gonna 9/11 it unless Morty Smith gets better grades in math!
The entire Scary Terry bit is funny. The fact that the one-note seeming character actually has more depth behind him is something I appreciate about Rick and Morty. Jerry and Summer both feel a tiny bit more fleshed out by this episode. Beth feels pointless at this point, other than for her to be a plot device as an excuse for Rick to stay at the house. That will change eventually though, just not yet. The episode also puts slight twists on things with their sci-fi concept. The dream time going slower than regular time and dog time being 1/7 human time is a great little twist with some realistic but dumb reasoning behind it. I always like the subtle stuff like Rick saying scary coitus. It's just a good touch with the dialogue that most shows wouldn't come up with.
After a little scary coitus, they should be fast asleep.
There's also the dog poker game, which basically had to happen in a humanoid dog episode. At this point, the only main character I care about is Rick, and as someone that's seen the show all the way through before, I don't see that changing. I find Jerry funny at least. Rick's voice is a lot closer to how it is now. Morty's is pretty much the same as now, with the one main difference being Morty talks more now instead of just screaming, due to a confidence boost. I can say that I like this episode. Everything with Rick is fantastic, but the family being uninteresting does sink the episode a little. It's a Christmas episode. Rick shoves Morty inside a homeless guy with failing health, where he discovers Anatomy Park and some kind of unmemorable characters. Meanwhile, Jerry's parents show up with a new lover for the mother. I think both plots are okay this time around, but neither are amazing. The Rick side gives you your usual ridiculous sci-fi stuff where diseases are monsters. Meanwhile, Jerry's parents' side gives us some good awkward humour. The Rick side is decent, but it gets ridiculous so fast, and never really becomes more insane as it goes along. I feel like the progression into the insanity would have been better, like with most episodes. Xenon Bloom is the only real memorable new character, but even he is lacking. His best line was about getting gonorrhea mixed up with a T-Rex, but that's the only one I found funny from him, since, you know, Jurassic Park.
Gonorrhea can't see us if we don't move. Wait, I was wrong, I was thinking of a T-Rex.
The animation for the monsters in this one is fantastic, like usual. The comedy feels a bit lacking in this one, for the first half at least. I did find Rick's passion for Pirates of the Pancreas infectious.
Pirates of the Pancreas was my baby. You know, I got a lot of pushback when I pitched it, Morty. I guess I'm still a little defensive.
I also really liked a subtle moment of Jerry's dad sneaking into the closet with a Superman costume, the huge naked Reuben over the United States, also Rick talking about Annie's puffy vagina, which is also obviously a bit creepy. I think this is one of the least memorable Season 1 episodes. The concept for the Rick plot is decent, but I just think it gets too ridiculous too quickly for its own good. But Jerry's side being something I enjoyed for Jerry as a character, makes me think mediocre is the appropriate score for this episode overall. Though this is closer to being good rather than bad, while with the pilot I was considering calling it bad, but I just couldn't because it had too much redeeming it. It's hard to put a finger on what I mean, I guess it was just lackluster. In M. Night Shaym-Aliens, Rick knows he's being watched by alien scammers while he is in a simulation so that he drops info on how to make concentrated dark matter. Meanwhile, Jerry, in the same simulation Rick is in, has to do a pitch meeting and winds up having the best day of his life. The simulation inside of simulation thing is great and is the first plot which I feel they almost met the full potential of. The ending with Rick tricking the scammers into thinking he was tricked is brilliant, even though it was really predictable.
What happened back there?
Why don't you ask the smartest people in the universe, Jerry? Oh yeah, you can't. They blew up.
Jerry's side of things isn't genius by any means, but it is one of the funniest things from the show for me. Jerry listening to human music and seeing the same three people over and over, and hearing people repeat words, but being oblivious to his situation, is brilliant. For his best day ever to be taken away from him at the end is both depressing and funny, something that Rick and Morty tends to nail. The episode really uses the simulation to its advantage in multiple ways. Not only did it use it for the story and jokes, but it being in the first season probably meant the budget was fairly low for both an animated show and a sci-fi show, so having characters repeat movements and reusing the same character models and dialogue probably reduced the cost of this episode by quite a bit. David Cross nails it as the lead scammer. He had so much to a character that could have easily been really boring.
Oh, this is going to be such a mind.
As for negatives, it's mostly nitpicking, but since I found the episode's ending predictable, it stops this episode from being anything mind-blowing for me. And even though I find Rick and Jerry funny as characters, I still couldn't care less about Morty. With that being said, I really liked this episode. Even though Lawnmower Dog was the episode that showed me this show had potential, this episode made me realise this show was reaching its potential, something that it would continue to do over the season. Me Seeks and Destroys one of the most memorable episodes of the show, or most iconic I guess you could say. When I first dived into the series, around about when the last episode of Season 2 aired, I decided to watch it from the beginning, just in case it was a story-driven show. I really knew nothing about it, but anyway, this was one of the episodes I saw brought up most around that time period, whether it was the Me-Seeks themselves, the attempted rape scene, or yeah, pretty much those two things. They were some of the most mentioned things about the show. As for the episode, it has Rick giving the family a Me-Seeks box, which releases a creature that's sole purpose is to complete a task handed to it, and then they die. On the Rick side, it's Morty's time for an adventure. While the Morty side definitely has some highlight moments, like the attempted rape scene, definitely feels wrong to call it a highlight. It's the family side this time that's got a better story for me. I've already made it clear that I find Jerry to be a funny character, and his complete inability to complete what should have been the least difficult task handed to any of the Me-Seeks, other than the jar, is so funny. The episode also gives Beth some development, even if it is minimal, and it shows that her and Jerry's marriage is failing. The Me-Seeks trying to murder Jerry is such a brilliant little twist to the concept Rick laid out to the family at the beginning of the episode, even if it is predictable for a show that often turns dark. The Rick and Morty side is decent, but it feels weird pacing wise. It feels both slow and fast paced. I get that Morty's adventure is going to be relatively tame when compared to a Rick one, but I don't find it too interesting until they get to the pub or bar. They did have to build up Morty's dull adventure, so I get why it feels that way, but I just don't care for it that much until we get to the pub or bar, which is around halfway through. I will say I really liked the soap drop joke though. Such a weird twist to an overly used rape joke.
Rick and Morty go to giant prison. You know, if somebody drops the soap, it's gonna land on our heads and crush our spines, Morty. You know, it'll be really easy to rape us after that.
Speaking of rape, let's talk about that scene. I still think it's unclear whether it's meant to be funny or not. I've spoken to multiple people about it and we all seem to agree that it was at least somewhat funny. I think it's just because of the ridiculousness of it being a jelly bean, but obviously the scene was also there to make us feel bad for Morty, which it does. The Meeseeks are intriguing creatures. They are annoying. Really freaking annoying. I don't find them funny, but I find the reactions to them funny. Like just the whole situation at the end and how confused everyone is.
What the is going on?
This episode showed to us that Rick cares about Morty. He shoots the jelly bean while Morty isn't around. Finally, the episode ends with a fourth wall break. Not a fan. I'm okay with certain fourth wall breaks, but when Rick says stuff like, "See you next week, everybody," I just sigh. I just find it unfunny, and fourth wall things like that are so easy to make that it just feels lazy for this show. Wubba Lubba Dub Dub though, I do like, but mostly because of a later episode. Overall, I like this episode. The Mystique side is brilliant through the entire thing, and the show managed to make it so that you can tolerate their annoyance somehow. The Rick and Morty side, however, I find mostly dull. And other than a joke here or there, the only thing that stands out is the attempted rape scene due to shock, and showing that Rick truly cares about Morty. While M. Night's Shaym-Aliens made me realise how great the show could potentially be, and the Meeseeks episode made me realise how dark it could potentially go, this episode was pretty shocking when I first watched it. It had so much confidence to do what it did, and it worked. The plot is that Rick gives Morty a love potion, which Rick basically calls a rape drug, which it pretty much is. Unfortunately, it's flu season, which causes the love to spread, causing everyone to love Morty that isn't part of his family. Meanwhile, Jerry tries to prove he's a worthy husband for Beth. The episode quickly goes off the rails, having that brilliant Rick and Morty pacing, from one human to every human in love with Morty, to them being weird praying mantis monsters, to Rick flat out giving up for the first time. This episode nails the shock humour because it isn't just random shock humour, which is why most shows fail with it. This episode is pretty stuffed with humour, even if I don't consider any moment laugh out loud worthy. Rick's little rant to Summer, Jerry saying, "Well look where being smart got you," the news anchors, and this episode also has what I consider one of the smartest jokes from the series, the Ernest Hemingway joke.
I wish that shotgun was my penis.
If it were, you could call me Ernest Hemingway.
I don't get it, and I don't need to.
A joke that I'm guessing went over about 75% of the audience's heads, possibly more than that. I didn't laugh at it, but I appreciate it. The episode even has a little subtle animation comedy, like that guy licking Rick's shit for a couple of seconds. I love Jerry actually being badass for once, taking down crap tons of mantis creatures. Now let's talk about the ending stuff. Rick calling out Morty for wanting a rape drug was great and needed. Morty calling out Rick for not warning about side effects and just being irresponsible was great and was needed. That moment shows our character development, showing that Morty is getting more confident already. Now the very ending. Rick and Morty switching realities. Rick giving up. Wow. This got me hooked on the show. I didn't cry like I'm guessing a lot of people did, because I can't get attached to characters in shows that quickly, or people in real life, but damn, it was still pretty shocking. Upon original watch, yeah, it's shocking, but because Rick and Morty have become known for these sorts of moments, I feel as though it takes away some impact from this episode. Plus, besides the ending, the episode is just a regular good old episode. I really like this episode, but other than the ending, there's nothing that blows me away for me to be able to say that I love it. Morty impregnates a space sex doll. He then has to take care of the son that is born from it, that only wants to kill. Meanwhile, Rick and Summer go to a planet ruled by women, where the men are just brutes. So, what are my thoughts on this episode? Not good. Not good. In fact, this is the only Rick and Morty episode I think is bad. For starters, Morty's side had potential, but with it only being Morty raising the kid, it gets boring. Meanwhile, the Rick side is just another gender argument episode with a sci-fi filter slapped on. The funniest moments come from Beth and Jerry judging Marty's parenting.
Where's your hands? There's your hands, and that's how we play handy hands.
Oh, you are going to ruin that kid, Morty.
But I think they should have been trying to raise the kid too. That would have been funnier. I think so, at least. I also find Rick's arguments against women, just in general, odd for his character. Rick sees almost everyone as equally terrible, so the gender thing feels forced for this episode's plot to work. This episode also has too many fourth wall breaks, I just can't stand them. Honestly, most episodes on sex or gender in TV shows are just terrible. When it's kids arguing, then I feel like he can justify the gender rivalry more. Rick is also genuinely nice to Summer. To her face. Weird. This is the only episode of the show that doesn't feel like Rick and Morty to me. There's not much I can even say on this other than that it feels like a random sitcom episode with a sci-fi skin. It doesn't get to the typical Rick and Morty levels of ridiculousness at any point. I think this is a bad episode. It's dull and mostly doesn't even feel like the show that I like. Rixty Minutes is a strange episode, even by Rick and Morty standards. The main plot has Rick and Morty sat down watching TV from every possible timeline. The TV stuff is all improv too. Meanwhile, Rick hands Jerry, Beth and Summer a headset so they can see into their alternative lives they could have been living in other realities. The main plot doesn't really have too much substance for a plot. I debate which is the main plot and which is the B plot, but I'm going with Rick for the main plot. Some of the TV things I don't like, as they are hit and miss. I, for example, am not a big fan of the beloved Ants in My Eyes Johnson, because it's just the Justin Roiland saying the character's name and what it does formula. I also don't like Fake Doors, as it goes on for far too long, and I'd rather have had 2 more little clips in place of it, instead of just this one. For the bits that I like, Two Brothers is pretty great. I love how you can hear Justin Roiland's voice crack at the end.
It's called Two Brothers. Two Brothers. It's just called Two Brothers.
I like Gazorpa's outfield too, just because he's a dick. I know he says his name, but the other part of the joke is what works for me. The part of him being a dick is the part that works for me.
I don't give a I'm Gazorpa field, bitch. Now give me my enchilada.
My favourite though is probably Strawberry Smiggles. Freaking brutal and brilliant.
Jesus Christ! Jesus Christ! It hurts! My entrails are out! Why would you even want to eat these? They're soaked with my stomach acid!
It may be an unpopular opinion, but I think the sequel to this has better TV gags. Meanwhile, most of the Jerry, Beth and Summer side has them all fighting about what if. Though most of your sympathy is supposed to go to Summer. I don't really understand why she didn't see many alternate realities. I mean, I know it's because her parents didn't have her in those timelines, but what if Jerry's parents didn't have him? It's a small flaw. The ending to this episode is amazing, even if Jerry and Beth constantly fight after this. Overall, I think the episode had a really creative concept, and I like it. The TV stuff is a bit hit and miss, and the emotional stuff with Jerry and Beth and Summer was great, if only it managed to stick to that for more than an episode. Something Ricked This Way Comes has Summer getting a job for the devil, and Rick trying to ruin him. Meanwhile, after Jerry rejects the idea of Pluto not being a planet due to protecting his pride, he becomes a speaker on Pluto to reassure citizens that the planet isn't shrinking. The episode isn't very smart with either plot, but the comedy is above average in this one. It may not have a ridiculous plot, but it does do a lot with the story that it has. Rick instantly knowing he's met the devil is great. The butter robot's tragic life is great.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
The ironic side effect of owning everything the devil sells is great. Rick cancelling it is great. Rick getting bored is great. All of these moments have comedy stuffed in, and for a lack of a better word, it's great. My funniest scene is probably the retarded moment.
Morty, I'm not disparaging the differently abled. I'm stating the fact that if I had used this microscope, it would have made me mentally retarded.
Okay, yeah, but I don't think it's about logic, Rick. I think the word has just become a symbolic issue for powerful groups that feel like they're doing the right thing.
Well, that's retarded.
I think it may be my favourite moment, but I also like the devil saying Rick is the devil.
I mean, seriously. I may be the devil, but your grandpa is the devil.
On some level, I like the X gon' give it to you ending, but it's just so random that I can't possibly love it. Sometimes stuffing in joke after joke works, like in Marge versus the monorail from The Simpsons, but I don't think this particular moment worked that well. I think it might actually be better on its own with no real context, since the scene comes out of nowhere anyway. So yeah, mixed thoughts on that scene. The Jerry side is decent just because Jerry tries to act like he has pride, but it's one note. I really like the Rick side of things, but the Jerry side is only okay. Overall, I like this episode. In this episode, our C-137 Rick is accused of killing Ricks from other alternate universes by the Citadel of Ricks. Our Rick and Morty then need to stop the criminals. Evil Rick and Evil Morty. Plus, Jerry becomes friends with a doofus Rick, or whatever, he eats shit. This episode is brilliant. It changed the way that I saw Rick and Morty and allows for so many theories, it's incredible. Also, I like the ball stabbing machine. This isn't a particularly funny episode, but it is one of the most creative. And I watch Rick and Morty for the creativity. The chase scene allowed for tons of creative locations to be shown. We actually get a scene of Rick clearly caring for Morty. This is especially great since Rick tries to play off that all Morty is for him is an intelligence radar blocker. My favourite comedic moment is probably the Morty covered ship where Rick just says it's not efficient.
On paper, Morty, on paper. I wouldn't do this, it's barbaric overkill. I mean, you could accomplish the same result with like 5 Mortys and a jumper cable.
The other Mortys are great. Hammer Morty being my favourite. And wow, that evil Morty reveal was great, even if it got a little predictable towards the end. This sets up possibilities for the future, which the show will get back to, but more on that later. The Jerry plot is also pretty great. I find it hilarious watching the other Ricks bully Doofus Rick. I'm an asshole. His friendship with Jerry is beautiful and tragic, and one of the best Jerry plots to date. Like I said earlier, this episode really expands the lore, I guess, of the world of Rick and Morty. The episode concept makes the show have nearly endless possibilities now. The episode is really careful to show that while they're all Ricks and Mortys, their personalities can range from incredibly different from the C-137 duo to almost identical. This is a great episode. I really like this episode. Ricksy Business has Rick and Summer throwing a party while Jerry and Beth are away. Morty tries his best to keep the house up. Meanwhile, Jerry and Beth go on a Titanic reenactment. While this is certainly basic for the plot, it is one of the funnier episodes from the series, which it basically had to be because of that. It does manage to insert enough sci-fi stuff for it to feel like a Rick and Morty episode. Don't know why a Citadel Rick was invited though. Rick hates those guys. Then again, he hates Gearhead, and he's there. The episode introduces 3 fairly important characters into the series: Gearhead, Squanchy, and Bird Person. Having Bird Person in this episode helps the episode feel important. It also gives Tammy an important role, as she'd only been a background character before this. While there isn't anything massive in terms of character development or story, Bird Person does explain that wubba lubba dub dub, a line that felt throwaway, something Morty acknowledges, actually means Rick is in great pain. This develops his character while also leaving us with more questions for the next season. While Summer doesn't get many big moments in this episode, Morty gets some moments with Jessica. He doesn't get much development from it, but it does show that Jessica isn't the typical kind of crush character. She actually cares for Morty on some level and isn't nasty to him. The moment the line "unsinkable" is uttered in the Jerry plot, you know the ship is gonna fail to sink. The best line from that side is,
"What does a rapist look like exactly, Beth? Is it a Slavic man wearing a denim jacket with a patchy beard and the scent of cheap champagne wafting over his blister-pocked lips?"
The whole thing isn't amazing, just a typical Jerry B plot. The best line in the whole episode for me came from the great and terrible Abadolf Linkler, saying,
"Prepare to be emancipated from your own inferior genes."
The episode ends on what I guess you could call a cliffhanger now, and by that I mean the writers could have easily brought the world back to being normal, but instead chose to use the stop time for the premiere of the next season. Overall, this episode is good. I like it. While I didn't say too much negatively about this episode, the fact the plot is simplistic and there's no real enemy unless you count Rick or the party itself, plus the rapist, makes the episode good but nothing special to me. It's great to get introductions to a bunch of characters though. Overall, this season does a good job at being a first season for a show. It gives us a decent idea of who the main characters are, even if Summer, and particularly Beth, felt underdeveloped. They may have had some decent moments here or there, but for them themselves, it felt like very little personality was injected into those moments or lines. This season gives us some truly clever episodes like M. Night Shaym-Aliens or Close Encounters of the Rick Kind, which added to the world building of an already well-developed world by an immense amount. The show sets its tone that it would maintain for the upcoming seasons, even if this season gives more of a focus on introducing characters and building up their personalities, rather than giving said characters emotional journeys. This is only the first season of a show that will go on for years. I don't think it needs insanely emotional stories at this point, because I don't care about the characters enough yet. The show, while extremely witty, isn't laugh out loud funny for me. Most of the time. Which, of course, is a bit of a downside, but the wit in the background details or small dialogue choices, plus the improv makes the show feel well developed, smart, and even more real at points. Small things help really add to the charm, like Rick never wearing a seatbelt. The animation style, that a lot of people shake their heads at for some reason, is very charming for me. The human characters are simple, and I'm not a fan of a lot of the background characters' eyes being in weird places, but for most characters, the simple design works well. The reason I think that is because it makes the aliens and monsters stand out more. The show sets itself up for so many ideas and has infinite potential. The portal gun, the citadel of Rick's backstory, what life was like when Rick wasn't there, there's so much the show can do. That's this season done. It's clear I enjoyed the season even if it had my least favourite episode in the series, and a bit of a dull pilot. I could rate the season as a whole using my ratings for the episodes, but even when I did that in the South Park Season 1 review, it felt a bit wrong for me. It should feel factual to my opinion on the season as a whole, and in South Park's case, it was, but basing the rating off of the individual episode ratings doesn't allow for my thoughts on the overall package. It only allows for a mean score on those individual episodes, bundled in with each other. It both makes sense to keep and get rid of the overall rating, but I decided to get rid of it since I wasn't quite sure what to do with it, which makes sense to me. I'm probably weird, but that's okay. I know I'm weird even if it's not because of that. Now let's wait to find out if I think Season 2 is better or worse, or even possibly the same level of quality as this first season. Those are my thoughts on Rick and Morty Season 1. I say as if you didn't already know that. Let me know your thoughts on either the individual episodes contained in the season, or the season as a whole. Until next time, I guess.